Welcome to Cheese In Depth webinars. We get to speak with Jodi Ohlsen Reed from Shepherd Way Farms. I'm going to turn it over to Jodi. Hi, Jodi.
Hi, thanks for having me today.
You're very welcome.
Thanks to everybody for joining us. We're going to tell you a little bit about the farm and what we do and what a typical day is like here, and then we'll go through some of the cheeses and the pairings that I've put together, and then some of the pairings that Michael has for you. We started farming in 1995. Neither of us grew up on a farm. We're located in Minnesota, about an hour south of Minneapolis. And when we started, we were going to be doing just sheep dairy. Not cheese. There wasn't a plan for that at the time, and we began by selling sheep milk through a cooperative in Wisconsin. And we did that for a couple of years until we had enough milk that we needed something else to do with it. When we started farming, we really wanted to have our family as the center of our work life, and farming was a way that we could combine our passions for the environment and care cooperative in Wisconsin. And we did that for a couple of years until we had enough milk that we needed something else to do with it. When we started farming, we really wanted to have our family as the center of our work life. And farming was a way that we could combine our passions for the environment and caring for animals and keep the family as a focus. And you'll see that in our mission statement, which was, we didn't know it was a mission statement at the time, but we were writing down what it was that we wanted to do. And you'll see at the end of it that we talk about that there's still a place in society for the small family farm, and that's even more important now than it was when we started. And we didn't know how important that was going to be in 2020 when so many small farms have gone out of business and are on the verge of not being able to make it now. But going back to the history of what we're doing, here we see everything that we do and everything we make is in pursuit of the goal of combining our family and farm and care for the environment and the animals. You can see the photo there with the sheep is Stephen with the shepherd, and there's Stephen and me up at the top. All of our labels and things have Stephen on them as the shepherd. So if you look closely at your labels, you'll see different scenes on our farm where we took little snapshots with Stephen with the sheep. And I'm not on any of the labels, but Stephen is. We are one of the few farmstead sheep dairies in North America. There aren't all that many total. It's a little bit challenging to raise sheep and milk them for a number of reasons, depending on what area you're in, but primarily they don't give as much milk as cow dairies, so it's a little bit more challenging to make it all pencil out in the end. So we started making cheese in 1998 when there was a surplus of our milk and not enough market for it. In 98, the sheep cheese industry and the artisan cheese industry in general were very different. The consumers were not as well versed in cheese as they are now, and there wasn't as much available. So the market for sheep milk was still really small. And we made our first batch of cheese in 1998, and that was the Friesago. We'll see that in the slideshow as we go here, and then it'll be one of the cheeses that we taste also. I did not go to school initially for cheese making. I was a writer and editor, and eventually moved into making cheese as we worked with the University of Minnesota, which is where we made our first cheese. This slide that you're seeing here is my family. These are 4 boys, and raising them on a farm was one of the big goals of starting this business. And they all played a variety of roles as children, and growing up, and now as young adults, they still play a variety of roles. You can see them at different ages here, and I'll leave it up to you to figure out which one is which. they're pretty much paired together, but some of them are mixed in. Some of the boys still help with farmers markets, coming down and maybe helping me in the cheese room. Our youngest son works on our farm half-time during college and full-time in the summer. So it's still a family venture here. But my youngest does intend to go into agriculture, and that's one of the things that we hope to support is more young people going into farming and encouraging this next generation of farmers. Let's take a look at the next slide and see where we're at in my story here. I mentioned that the first cheese we made with the University of Minnesota. They have a pilot plant where you can lease space and expertise, and that was where we had our first batch of cheese made after we identified the type of cheese that we wanted to make, which back in '98, people were a little more hesitant to try sheep cheese. So especially sheep milk cheese was unfamiliar to most people. We just saw a nice shot of our sheep out on pasture. We have East Friesians, and they are a dairy breed, just like we have meat and dairy cow breeds. We have the same in sheep, some that are better for milk, some that are better for meat, some that are all-purpose. So sheep milk was a little bit of a challenge for people to get used to the idea initially. The University of Minnesota had a sheep dairy experiment station where they had worked with sheep, so they consequently had a cheesemaker who had also worked with sheep milk and a professor. And we collaborated with them on our first cheeses, and that's where I learned to make cheeses, working side by side with the University of Minnesota's cheesemaker. This is our milking parlor. You can see that we have what's called a double 24. You can have 24 sheep on each side, and where the guys are standing, looks like Stephen and one of my sons. We call that the milking pit, and the sheep come in and they have a carefully chosen ration that helps them produce really high quality milk with good components for cheese making. They come in and they eat, and they're milked while they're eating. They actually find it to be a relaxing process. We try to stay calm and quiet when we're bringing them in and working with them to help them feel relaxed. And getting good food is good incentive for them to come in. They only produce about 2 quarts of milk, a little more a day, so it's quite a bit less than a goat or a cow. So when people ask why is artisan cheese so expensive, I told one of the reasons that sheep milk might be a little more expensive is that we get such a small quantity. People often want to know what sheep milk tastes like. It's fairly sweet and not that much different in taste than cow milk, but it is higher in quite a few of the components, like calcium, protein, fat, which allows us to make really good tasting cheese. It's the good tasting milk. You're taking a little peek here inside my cheese make rooms. I'm the cheesemaker. Right now I have 2 part-time people that help me, and that's it. That's our whole staff on the cheese end of things. I have 1 big vat that you can see full of milk there, and next to that vat are some of the hoops that I use for a variety of cheeses. And the blue of the cheeses you're trying today, I use those particular hoops for the Sogn, the Morcella, and the Big Woods Blue. The 2 little vats there are about 100-gallon vats, and you can see there's nothing mechanized there, not even a paddle. So when we say that our cheese is made by hand, it's very much made by hand. The stirring, cutting the curd, hooping, salting, all those things I do by hand, and I make every single wheel of cheese. So that's the made by hand part. You could also see in the back there that we have a pasteurizer. Our cheeses are pasteurized. A lot of the cheeses that I make go out the door at 60 days or younger, so they're required by law to be pasteurized. A few of the cheeses that I make, Friesago, Big Woods Blue, a couple of others, are older, so they could be raw milk, but the logistics of having raw milk cheese and pasteurized cheese in my small facility are pretty overwhelming, just the logistics of doing that. So at this time, everything is pasteurized that we have there. Let's take a look at the next slide and see what we have here. Oh, here. This is Friesago. This is a Friesago make, and you can see down in the corner where I have the red spatula in my hand, there I am checking to see for a clean break. After we add the rennet, the cheese sets into a semi-firm consistency, kind of like a firm yogurt. And there I'm checking it to see if it's set. And that nice clean line there we call a clean break. After that, we cut the cheese into small curds using wire cutters, we call cheese knives. Cut that into curds, and that's one of the main steps of making cheese. And particularly Friesago, we cut into very small curds, and it's cooked a bit and stirred very vigorously to get more moisture out. On the right, you see blocks of that curd that we've pressed up underway, and I cut them into blocks and put them into the hoops at the left, or the molds. And those molds then go on to the press that you can see in the upper corner. And they are pressed on there for 2 to 3 hours. We flip them every 15 minutes. We take them out and flip them over. And then on the left, top, you can see the cheese as it's starting to form more into the wheels that we'll be familiar with later. The Friesago is also one of our brined cheeses. All of our cheeses are brined. I mean, all of our cheeses get salt, and some of them are brined, some of them are salted by hand, some are salted in curd. When we look at the different cheeses, we'll talk with you about how each of those cheeses get the salt in them, that they, whether it's brined or hand salting. Let's see, here I am making, I'm leaning forward to see it, looks like I'm making Shepherd's Hope here. Shepherd's Hope isn't one of the cheeses that we're tasting today, but the makes for the Sogn and the Blue actually look very similar to this one. Shepherd's Hope is a fresh cheese that I make, but the Sogn and the Blue use the same hoops. I use the same curd bucket on the top there. I'm scooping curd out of the curd scoop by hand. It's not a bucket, it's a scoop. And they go into the molds, and those molds get flipped by hand on the table, and the cheese, the weight of the cheese itself presses the cheese into the hoops, and you can see up on the top that they pretty quickly turn into cheese wheels. So one of the things that I wanted to tell you a little bit about is what our farm life is like here, and I kind of flew through some of that earlier, but our farm is about 43 acres. It's a family farm, and we have primarily sheep. We also have chickens, ducks, and pasture-raised pigs. And so it's a somewhat diversified, but our primary product is cheese. The pigs are here to eat the whey that's left over from the cheese making, and the whey-fed pork is really delicious. They're also out on pasture. The sheep are also pasture-based. Our chickens are outside, and our ducks are on pasture also. So everybody's out eating and keeping down some of the insect population, the chickens and the ducks, and fertilizing and adding to the environment. That regenerational aspect of farming is really important to us, where our goal is to put back as much as we take out. So we like to use the animals to help restore the environment by their grazing, helps encourage the roots of the plants on the pasture to grow deeper. And we have a variety of grasses and forbs that are on our pasture that make up the pasture, so it's not just grass. And the animals help fertilize it, and those are some of the things that we do to give back to the environment here. We also have very diverse wildlife because we don't spray for pests or weeds or things, so we have a nice variety of insects and birds, and all of those things help the continuation of a healthier environment here. This year, for the first time, we have some honeybees on our property. A friend of ours that's raising bees has them on our west pasture, and they are producing honey like crazy. So this whole, the whole circle of what we do is really important. The importance of the environment is just one aspect, but the making a variety of foods and cheeses. Oh, here's a picture in our front yard of some of the cheeses. These are 3 that you'll be tasting a day, and then the Shepherd's Hope's hiding in the back there too. So you can see the blue cheese and the Friesago and the Morcella. And having all of these smaller artisan cheesemakers across the country is really important for our food diversity. It's not that I'm going to make a huge amount of cheese in the world or any of the really small producers. We don't make a huge volume, but we all make cheese in our own style, in our own way. Even if we make the same recipe, there are going to be differences and nuances that reflect the cheesemaker's style and our environment. We like to see what our cheese will do in the environment that we provide for it. And sustainability of those cheeses and those farms is supported by consumers and customers that help keep us all going. Let's move on to the next one.
Well, the next one takes us to cheese. So
pretty on to the cheese. Okay. Yeah. I'll just talk a little bit more about the farm side of things, and then we can move on to cheese unless anybody has any particular farm questions. Stephen runs the farm side of things. He's in charge of all managing the land and the animals and the milking. I forgot to mention, he also does my pasteurizing for me in the morning, which makes his morning extremely early. My youngest son works on the farm side with Stephen, and then we currently have 2 part-time people working on the farm side also. We milk the sheep twice a day, in the morning and at night, and not a lot of vacations in that lifestyle, and the sheep have not quarantined. They've kept, well, I guess they are quarantined, but nothing's really changed. They keep milking and producing milk, and we keep making cheese. And where our cheese goes has changed very dramatically in the last few months as our restaurants and food service customers either closed or changed their practices dramatically. So our world has shifted along with everybody else's, but our workday remains very much the same. So we're a very small operation people-wise, but it's we've had a lot of different people that have worked with us over the years who've come out and apprenticed or toured or just met with us to find out more about what we do as they go on to do more things in farming and cheese making.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
How does the seasonality affect your cheeses, your production of your cheeses?
Now that's a good point. The sheep milk only about 7 months out of the year, so we have a couple of breeding groups that lamb in a staggered way so that we don't only have milk during 7 months out of the year, but there is usually a time late in the fall when we run out of sheep milk and the sheep stop milking. So seasonality is a very big part of what we do for a number of reasons. When the sheep first start milking, their milk components are very different than they are in the middle of the year. So the way that I make cheese, I have to adapt to the milk. So if you're in a very big setting with a lot of cow milk, for example, they would standardize the milk, make sure that it's the same amount of fat every single time, that sort of thing. But on an artisan scale, I have to adapt to the sheep. So the way that their milk performs in the cheese room changes depending on where they are in lactation, the days, the weather affects it. Right now it's about 90 degrees and they don't want to eat or drink, so in the next couple of days I'll be seeing a different kind of milk than I worked with yesterday. So that type of seasonality affects me as a cheesemaker. I have to be able to adapt and respond to the changes in the milk. We also then do not have milk for a certain amount of time. So usually November, first part of December, we don't have fresh milk. So some of the cheeses disappear for a little while. Shepherd's Hope goes away. Morcella is a seasonal cheese we only make in the spring and early summer. We continue to have the hard-aged cheeses like the Friesago, Burr Oak, and we have blue year-round, but the other ones go away for just a little while. One thing that you can do with sheep milk is freeze it and make some cheeses out of the frozen milk. It changes the makeup of the milk a little bit, so not all cheeses work well with it, but we can do that with some of the cheeses. So we may, depending how long our downtime is, we might use some frozen milk to make, for example, Hidden Falls, a batch of Hidden Falls, which is a cow and sheep milk blend cheese that we have. I'm so used to the seasonality of it that I almost would have forgotten to mention that. Did you have any questions?
No questions yet, but in that direction that you're talking about, the animals, they don't stop eating. So you still have to care for them. You have all that, but you're not getting any milk.
Right. So the seasonality, there's a seasonality for the farm business too that is always challenging. So for example, when the sheep are eating the most and expenses are the most here because of winter, it's very expensive for feeding, bedding, heating, all of the things that make winter challenging. That's also our lowest income time. So that's always a really fun time of year when you juggle the higher needs and the lower income. And then summer is generally they're on pasture, and that changes the need for feed. And of course, we don't have to pay for heat in the summer. And it's usually one of the times of year that we sell the most cheese. Farmers markets and restaurants in particular are usually very lively. This year, we're all having to adapt and be really creative in our how we sell the cheese, where we're selling the cheese, and being flexible in which ones we're making. How much aged cheese compared to how much fresh cheese is very different this year than it usually is in the summer. So there's a lot of adapting that goes on in farming and in cheese making, and when you put them together, you have to be a very, very flexible. So pardon me?
Sorry. I was just thinking about the polar vortex that you guys were dealing with and trying to keep them warm in sub-zero temperatures.
That was a really tough year. We had not this year, but prior we had a winter that was more brutal than we had ever seen here, and it actually caused us to change the way that we farm in the winter. Our sheep have always spent the majority of their time outside in the winter by choice. They could go inside, but they mainly spent their time outside. But the polar vortex was so brutal that they could not stay outside, so that we really had to make sure there was room for every single sheep to be inside for a much greater part of the winter than we normally would have. So the changing climate is changing the way that we're farming also. It's been really wet, and sheep don't enjoy wet. Their feet don't like it, they don't like it, so it's another place that we're having to shift what we're doing to be able to keep doing it. It's that polar vortex, really, we saw quite a few of our peers leave farming that year. It was just too hard on the animals and too challenging for a lot of the farms. So it was the beginning of a really sad period where we've seen a lot of people leave dairy farming. And so everybody's cheese eating is even more important now than it ever has been.
Yeah, climate change, in Florida we deal with rising seas and that, but the temperature is something that it plays havoc on the animals. I mean, if it's cows, you put 300 cows in a room and it's 80 degrees. Sheep, it's a bit different.
And they do help heat things up a little bit, but their fur kind of their wool insulates them a little bit more, so they don't give off quite as much. But they do help heat up a room a bit. For lambing, our lambing barn is heated, so it's not as brutally cold. But by heated, we mean it's above freezing. It's not 70 in there, but it's cozy. And once all the babies and moms are in there, it does heat up quite nice, and it stays pretty warm in there, especially compared to minus freezing temperatures.
All right, you ready to taste some cheese?
I think we should taste some cheese. Let's see, who do we have up first? I think we have Friesago up first. This Friesago is an aged sheep milk cheese, aged pressed sheep milk cheese with a natural rind. It's changed a lot since we first made it. The very first time, a few years that we made it, it was a black wax cheese, as was the fashion in 1998. We named Friesago. You can see the first part of Friesago is a bit like Friesian, which are the sheep that we have. So when we were starting with cheese, we were modeling more after European cheeses at the time, and Friesago sounded like a good name to us. So our black wax sheep milk cheese was meant to be a nice access point for people who hadn't had sheep cheese before that. A lot of people say, I've never had sheep cheese, and I ask them, Manchego? Oh yeah. And have you had Roquefort? And they've had sheep cheese and not realized it. It's not as challenging to get people interested in sheep cheese now as it was in '98. As consumers became more interested in natural rinds and a wider variety of rustic cheeses, we were able to ship our cheese to a natural rind. And that was not necessarily an easy feat for me because there wasn't really anywhere to go to learn about that in the U.S. To learn about affinage or the finishing of cheese, a lot of people would go to study in France or Italy or other places abroad, but in the U.S. there weren't very many people doing it, and there wasn't any instruction book or YouTube or anything like that, so a lot of it was just following some basic rules of aging and managing your environment, the humidity and the temperature, and tending the cheese and learning what the cheese does here with brushing or washing with brine or not tending it, and finally finding a rhythm that worked for the cheese and then shifting it all to a natural rinded cheese. So I have, my cheese is over here, and let's see, I don't know if you can see, I think so. So I have the Friesago here, and you can see the rind. If you look at your rind, it has been, we tidied it up before we sent it out. When it is in the aging room, when it's in the warmer, wetter aging room for a couple of months, it develops a wide range of flora on the rind that can be white, gray, even bright orange. When we get to the Sogn, I'll talk more about that bright orange. And all of those molds are in our ambient environment. I don't introduce any of them. They, because I make a nice little world for them to live on the outside of the cheese, they make themselves at home, and then I manage them by washing them with brine or just brushing them with a dry cheesecloth to keep the molds from becoming too dominating, because we don't want the molds to eat into the rind, but we do like them to add some of the depth and different flavor. This is a young Friesago. It's, let's see, this one's about 3 months old. So it's semi-firm. If we keep it around for another 6 months till 9 months to a year, it starts to get a firmer texture, more the texture of even as hard as a Parmesan if I age it long enough. Right now it's fairly mild and grassy. Throughout the different parts of the season, you can note different nuances in the taste of the cheese, depending on what the sheep are eating. I've not ever been able to identify anything in particular that they eat, but some people like to try to do that, identify what they might be eating. But it gets more of a grassy flavor when they're out on pasture, and it has a really mild, nutty finish. And this is one of my favorite ways to have Friesago. When I go places and I bring cheese, I have been known not to bring crackers because I forget. I would prefer to eat my cheese with just, this is a fig spread. I'm not sure where I got mine this time, but it's available. I can find it at the co-op and regular grocery stores and specialty food shops, but I like a nice fig spread on the Friesago. It lends a nice earthy note that goes with the nuttiness of the Friesago. This is my all-purpose cheese. I use this in my cooking all the time. So when I have to think of pairings, I just think of, well, how did I eat it last is usually it. And sometimes we have accidental pairings that come from what was in my refrigerator and what looks good to me, and then try it out and see if it's something good. And this was in my refrigerator, so we have some prosciutto with some shaved Friesago and some melon, and that's a really nice summer supper for me, and not a lot of work, but I do use the Friesago in my cooking a lot too. A really tired cheesemaker dinner would be cacio e pepe, so pasta with just cheese and some of the pasta water and salt and a lot of ground pepper, and that's a typical way that I would use Friesago. So as a grating cheese, it also melts nicely. I've made macaroni and cheese with almost every cheese that I have, so I have some really quick macaroni and cheese recipes for the Friesago. But that's my go-to all-purpose cheese. It's a nice table cheese, and then we also use it a lot in our daily cooking. Let's see who we have next up on the cheese.
Well, I have a couple things that, when I first tasted it, I did think a little bit of Manchego, but the Manchego does have a nuttiness as it's younger, but with this aging, it has a very, very distinct sweet butter to it with a little bit of nuttiness that is just lovely. I really like the way that works together. I paired this up with a couple things. There's a company called Brewer's Crackers, and it's an everything cracker. It's got rosemary, thyme, it's got everything in it. So it's really very flavorful and rich and that. So I'm using that, and then I'm also pairing it up with this is a really interesting flavor. This is nuts and honey, and it is just crazy. Big nuts in honey, and pairing that up. And those two, the cracker and the nuts, go really well together. And then beer-wise, I'm using this Saison DUPONT. It's a farmhouse ale, which I just really love those. And I think it really works really well playing them together.
Oh, very nice. I was counting on you to have good beer pairings.
Yeah, so you can go there's so many directions with this. It's such an easy to pair cheese that you really don't have to be very picky about it. You can pick out your favorite beer, and most likely it's going to work. It's very beer friendly.
I like that. I think it should have a sticker that says, "I am beer friendly."
I'm beer friendly. All right. So let's.
But this is all sheep milk with bits of morel mushrooms, and we make it in the spring as a celebration of spring. The morels grow near us. We have quite a few in the Bigwood State Park, is kitty corner from the farm, and there are a lot of morels in there. Unfortunately, I do not get to go harvest all of them. I don't have a tremendous amount of time for that, and I'm not sure the inspectors would really love it if I was harvesting my own mushrooms. So I get our mushrooms from, got a mushroom guy in northern Minnesota where we get the mushrooms from him. The morcella that you have today is much younger than the morcella in the picture here. It ripens a lot like a brie from the outside in. And
one of the questions is from Liz. When do you shear and how do you decide when?
Well, generally we shear shortly before lambing. We've shifted that a little bit this year. Previously, before we had so many polar vortexes and things like that, we sheared them in the winter, which is odd, but we sheared them right before lambing, and that way they were clean and they were more willing to go into the barn, and then it helped the lambs be able to nurse easily without all of that wool and everything. This year we sheared a slightly different time, and then we only shear once a year, but we save all of the wool and we use that for making comforters and pillows and mattress toppers. The reason that we do that is that the wool market isn't very good anymore. We used to make more money selling the wool, and now the money that we make from selling the wool usually about covers the cost of the shearing. So it's unfortunate, but that's the way that goes now. I did make some dryer balls out of wool, felted wool, the other day, just to see how that went, and that was an interesting project. And I do not knit or spin. I'm not skilled at either of those things. So.
All right, so let's take a step back. Liz also asked that you said that your January Friesago turned out particularly well. Why was that?
That my what?
Your January Friesago turned out really well.
I'm not really sure. January, depending on the components of the milk, the cheese will be different. The January milk Friesago is usually fairly high in fat initially, and then it evens out a little bit more. So you can taste different nuances in the cheese depending on what time of year that we're doing that we're making it, whether the sheep are on pasture, on full feed. So I'm not sure why it would have turned particularly well, but maybe it was special cheesemaker attention that day. I don't know.
Okay. All right. Since we kind of got interrupted there, why don't we start over? And one of Liz's questions was about talking about the rind here. So let's go back to where we left off, and you can start from scratch on the Morcella.
The Morcella is a bloomy rind, and it has P. candidum and geotrichium in the rind, which help create an environment for the molds to grow. The geotrichium helps prepare it for the P. candidum, which is the white mold that we get to see, and that helps the cheese age from the outside in. Right now, the cheese that you have is quite young, so it's very firm, and you get a bit of the mushroom flavor as well as a more wildflower note in the body of the cheese. The outside of the rind is often speckled with blues and grays and other molds that are in our ambient environment. Because I make blue cheese in the same space that I make all the other cheeses, you will see little spots of blue. They appear on almost every cheese I make. Some of them we brush them off and keep them down, and others we let them kind of flourish a little bit more. For my pairing on the Morcella, the only thing I ever really like to pair Morcella with is something bubbly like a Prosecco that will help cut the fat in the richness of the cheese. And I have the lightest cracker possible just to be the vehicle to carry the cheese to my mouth. So I don't really want to taste the cracker. I want something like a water cracker that's really light.
I paired this up with the mortadella, which is a very, very rich. You know, a lot of people say it's just bologna, but trust me, this is not. But what I wanted to do was, you have so much interesting flavors, richness here. I really wanted to take that, and I used that charcuterie to really bring up a little bit more of the flavors of the morels, because they were very subtle. You know, a lot of times when people are putting in ingredients, it can be overwhelming. But this has got a really nice balance to it. And then I use the everything cracker, and that really worked very well together. But I had so much butter and earthiness on there that I needed something to kind of sweeten it up. So I used the Celebrator, which is a German double bock, and you can see by the color here that this is it's not a stout. It's actually a double bock, and it's really amazing. It's all malt, you know. It's just a wort almost, and but it just works beautifully with the cheese.
Well, I would really like to try that. That looks delicious.
It is. It's absolutely wonderful, and the ABV is doing a good job. It's a very, very comfortable.
Sogn is a tome style. This is a recipe that I developed over time. I really wanted to make something. I'm going to hold this up. I don't know what you're seeing, if you're seeing me or a slide, but the Sogn has a really beautiful, colorful rind, and I wanted to make a cheese that was in the style of a tome, which is cheese made by the farmer on the farm, and it's usually a particular shape and size. I don't have a wheel here, so you can't really see the full scope of it, but it's more flat on the sides and top, and it has a rustic gray, white, and some very vivid orange on its rind. I wanted cheese that would show off some of the things that are going on the farm on a yeast and mold level that really show it a bit. And you can see that the body of the cheese is a little bit open. You can see some of the holes where the curd pressed not as tightly, because this is the curds are fairly large and pretty wet, and it's hand hooped into the same metal hoops that you saw previously, and it's a self-pressed cheese. I combined aspects of a few different tome recipes to suit the equipment that I have available, and also to suit my own style, what I'm able to do physically. So I make it in very small batches. We make about 24 wheels at a time, and I only make it once or twice a month, so there's not a lot of it available. And the orange mold that you see, the first time I ever saw that in my cheese rooms was on Friesago, and I was alarmed because I had never seen such a bright mold, and I brought it to someone to identify it, and they didn't know what it was, and so that was even more alarming. But I brought it to a Harvard microbiologist at a mold conference I went to. We sat around and talked about mold for 8 hours, And I had him take a look at it, and it's a specific mold that I've never heard it pronounced, so I'm going to pronounce it for you, and it's probably not accurate, but it's Sporendonema casei. And it is a mold that's most commonly found on sheep milk, and until not that long ago, they hadn't really seen a lot of it in the U.S. and more in Europe. And it's not a mold that you can purchase at this time. You can't, like the P. candidum that's on the outside of the Morcella. That's a mold that we can purchase from a culture provider, and you can add that to your milk or to your environment of the cheese, and it will grow on your cheese if everything's just right. This is a mold that has to happen by itself. I'm going to pull it up again. I think it's just one of the prettiest things I've ever seen. And once I knew that it was okay to have it, that it was not harmful, that it indicated a vibrant and healthy aging environment, then it was even prettier. It was not alarming anymore once I learned that it's perfectly fine, and in fact was a good representation of things going well in the aging rooms. It adds a bit to the rind. With this cheese, people want to know if they can eat the rind. It is edible. It is it's a very strong taste, very earthy, kind of musty. I don't tend to eat this rind as much. I do eat the rind on the Morcella. I like it very much. I think it's part of the experience, but I'm not offended if people don't eat it. But on the Sogn, I tend to go with the body of the cheese more, the paste of the cheese. And it is surprisingly mild compared to how aggressive the rind looks. The body of it is quite light, a little bit fruity, almost a pineapple note to it. And it's very much a standalone cheese on my plate. I'm not very good at pairing this one yet. This is what I had paired it with earlier, which is just a really dark chocolate with nuts that went, because the cheese is a bit fruity. I like the fruitiness and the chocolate. I tend to eat this cheese by itself, and I haven't really cooked with it very much yet. I like it on a cheese platter because it's so stunning, and it's also a really accessible cheese. It's not overwhelming. So I'm really curious to see what you've paired it with, Michael.
The earthiness on this is really amazing. It's really one of the things that I love about cheeses that have cave aging or have the unique rinds is that earthiness that it brings. I grew up in Iowa, and we had a root cellar, and in the summer it was hot, you go down there, but that earthy smell always kind of like a warm thing for me. And this has got just the right amount of earthiness. This is such a beautiful rind. I mean, gorgeous rind. It really is. And so I was trying to figure out what I would do with this, and one of my friends sent me some jams, Bonnie's jams. And so I have a whole plethora of them tonight because I wanted to try them, but also they are just so amazing with the cheeses. So I picked out a couple, but I ended up with this raspberry lime Ricky, which is a drink, by the way. And it's just absolutely fabulous. You know, when you talk about there's a little bit of fruitiness in here, well, these raspberries just blend in perfectly with the milkiness of it. It's just incredible. And then to kind of balance it out, I went with a tropical pale ale. And that's one of the things that you can do here in Florida is this is Cigar City, and this is their Invasion Pale. And it's a tropical pale, which means it's got a little bit of citrus in it. So the citrus, the raspberry, and the cheese. Oh, fabulous.
Nice.
It's also got a nice hoppiness to it, which blends in really well with the earthiness. So that hop and the earthiness just really come together and kind of mellow out. Each takes the hops down just a little bit, brings a little bit of earthiness, and then you get that butter that got just turns in there. It's just so much better. It's amazing. I don't even know how is there extra cream in there? A substantial amount of cream?
It's all the sheep milk. The sheep milk is so much significantly higher in fat and components than the cow and goat milk that sometimes it can mimic, maybe not a triple crown, but it mimics milk with cream added. So
it shows.
That's of having sheep milk. It's one of the beautiful qualities of sheep milk is that the great fattiness that comes through as butteriness. I really love working with sheep milk for that reason. Plus, the sheep are nice. The Big Woods Blue, and here, this is my Big Woods Blue snack. I don't know, without my other device, things are a little crazy over here. Big Woods Blue, I was really hesitant to make a blue cheese. When you have Roquefort as the sheep milk cheese that people know, I was hesitant to want to make a blue cheese, but and I didn't, it was a whole nother kind of make. That's one of the things that we make a wide variety of styles, and the blue cheese is a whole nother style to learn. So it was a challenge that I'm really glad that I took it on because it's a very lovely cheese to make, and sheep milk and blue are they're just such a good pair together. The butteriness that we were talking about, it gives a dimension to the sheep milk cheese blue that you can have a very spicy blue that's balanced by the butteriness of the sheep milk. So those two together really combine to make a blue cheese that stands out simply because it's the sheep milk, I think. For my pairing today, I have a little savory cookie cracker biscuit. Sorry, that's what it is. It's a biscuit. This is the one. It's an olive, and it's by Lark. And this is an amazing biscuit. It's very French style, sweet and savory olive biscuit, and it sounds like an odd combo maybe with the blue, but the sweetness of the biscuit with the olive, with the blue cheese, and then I topped it with, this is one of my favorite jams. It's a jelly, not a jam. My favorite jellies. It's a pear, champagne, and rosemary jelly, and it is just a really exquisite combination with the butteriness and spiciness of the blue, a little bit of sweetness from the biscuit, the savoriness of the olive, and then the pear and champagne gives just another little layer on top. And it's, I was just going to pair this with cherries because that's where I tend to go in the summer is simple, which fruits, which meats like salamis and things. But this was too good to not include these biscuits with the blue cheese. I also use the blue cheese a lot in cooking because it adds such a nice dimension to a steak or a burger or salad, roasted vegetables, in your dressings for your salads. I guess it's another go-to for me. And pairing it with things to drink is always interesting to me because it can go so many different directions, whether you have something sweet or something more hearty like a port. So people ask me what I pair different cheeses with, and I honestly often just try them with whatever I happen to have open from the last dinner or the last cooking or just the last bottle I have. So I'm continually surprised by what the blue goes well with. I'm not restricted to what I pair it with. So, what did you find it went well with, Michael?
Blues are my favorite category. As a international judge with or supreme judge with the International Cheese Awards, I get to pick what category. I'm right there in the blues. I just adore them. I think that people don't realize the diversity that you have in blues is so incredible. And I say this all the time. And people tell me, oh, I don't like blues. I tried one. Well, it's like going into the produce department, taking a bite of a vegetable and saying, I don't like vegetables. Because everyone's going to be different. And it's really, this is melt in your mouth blue. It is just, it turns into buttercream with a little bit of mushroom, and it is fabulous. You know, and when you said about thinking about Roquefort, and Roquefort's got so much saltiness to it, you know, not a bad thing. It's different. This is all cream. This is all butter. This is all mushroom. You know, you can literally rub this on you. It's just so delicious and through there. So it doesn't need anything. You know, it's just one of those blues that you can just, you know, slather on your finger and eat off of your hand. It's that good. And but when I was trying to decide on what I was going to do with it, I wanted to bring up some flavor, some sweetness, because with all the butter and all the cream, you can really go that way with it. And so I went with Bonnie's Jams again, and this is black and blue, blackberries and blueberries, and this is incredible. It's just, it's you know, the freshness of the berries and through there. And I did a segment today with creme fraiche and blueberries, and this cheese and that is creme fraiche, blueberries with even more. So then I take the cheese with the Effie's rye cake, and as I wanted a little bit of earthiness to come back, and the rye really does that, and then with the two together. So it's just really, really amazing. So beer-wise, I wanted something. A lot of times we go sweet, you know, we put something up against there to kind of balance that out. I didn't want to go that way, so I went with a black lager. I'm shameless here. I collaborated with Chris Johnson from 610, and we made this together. Won a gold medal at the Great American Beer Festival with this, and it's been as a cheese guy and also a brewer. To develop a beer that goes well with cheeses, this and the cream and the maltiness of this lager is wonderful. You get a cleaning, you get a accent of malt, and then you get the cream and butter.
That looks fantastic.
So that's, I can't say enough about the blue. You know, I'm really so surprised, not surprised at the quality, just the surprised on how creamy this blue is.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you like it.
Love it.
Yeah. And this one is named after the Big Woods State Park that's just across from the farm. It's a beautiful remnant of the big woods that used to stretch all the way across Minnesota. And now there are just little bits of it left. And we're lucky to have this little state park right across from us. And the blue cheese is named in honor of that, and the feeling that you get when you walk down into that beautiful big woods.
Yeah. Magnificent. You did a great job.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
I have to say that, it has a little bit to do with that I love blues, but every cheese on here is very unique. There's no, you know, the first one we kind of say that, well, you know, it tastes a little like Manchego. Well, there's a similarity, but it ends very quickly because there's so much more butter and sweet nut to yours. But everything here has got a unique flavor that I think represents your terroir, your cheese making, the sheep's milk. It is truly magnificent cheeses. You've done a fabulous job. This is one of the best pairings I've done on the show.
Oh, thank you very much. I really think it represents the reason that we want to keep as many independent small cheesemakers as we can, because there are many, many more doing little bits of cheese making around the country and have a wide range of cheeses that are unique and represent their land and their style and their animals and the things that they feed them. And I think that's one of the things that's so beautiful about artisan cheese making.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I just really appreciate this opportunity to, I don't know how many people we're talking to today, but it's really wonderful to have the chance to share what we do with other people. I'm kind of off here in my own little corner of the world doing my cheese thing, and it's nice to be able to be connected to everybody through cheese like this. So I really appreciate it, and I encourage everybody to keep on eating cheese everywhere you go.
All right. Well, I certainly appreciate you taking the time and being with us and talking about your cheeses. And I think that anyone that has an opportunity to be able to taste your cheeses will realize that they got something really special. It's not your everyday cheese. It is definitely above and beyond and just well done. And any chance that I get to be able to tell anybody that you want to try something exceptional, you want to try something unique, I think that that's where you can really do such a great job. I love these cheeses.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here today, and I am looking forward to trying the pairings that you've put together.
Well, they will be attached to the recorded version when it goes on YouTube. Michael Landis Cheese. They'll be in the description. Will be the cheeses along with what I paired it with.
Excellent.
So I'll have that. And again, thank you so much for taking your time. I know that we do this on a Tuesday to accommodate your schedule, and I think that it was wonderful to be able to spend the time and learn more about you, learn more about your cheeses, and of course, being able to virtually taste was fabulous. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, take care.
Bye now.
Bye. All right. So those of you that stick around, this will be recorded. It'll have two versions. It'll be the main and also the pairings only. And they'll be edited down with regard to the fact that we kind of lost Jodi a couple times. So I want to thank you guys for showing up. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about it. And there's about 12 more coming up over the next 4 or 5 weeks. So hopefully you'll join in on that. So thank you so much for participating. And I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in the very, very near future. So here we go. Thank you.